Let's dive right into this explainer and explore one of the most powerful stories ever told. It was the best of times, it was the worst of times. You've likely heard this legendary phrase before, right? But it is so much more than just a famous opening. Dickens is immediately warning us, you are about to witness a society experiencing immense prosperity right alongside agonizing suffering.
The best of times. Charles Dickens published this masterpiece in 1859, and here's the thing. He wasn't just writing for pure entertainment. Dickens was deeply, almost obsessively focused on social injustice. Just like in his other famous works, things like Oliver Twist or Great Expectations, he used his platform to shine a giant spotlight on poverty, inequality, and the everyday struggles of working people. But here, he scales it up to a massive national level. He uses the horrific fallout of the French Revolution as this huge historical warning about what happens when you just let generational oppression and inequality fester.
London, Paris, and Revolution.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how this duality perfectly captures the tension of the book's title. On the one hand, London represents relative stability, order, a general sense of security. But then, look at Paris. Paris is absolutely bubbling over with revolutionary energy, profound social conflict, and ultimately, sheer unadulterated violence. These two cities function as entirely opposing forces. And while Dickens makes it very clear that neither society is perfect, not by a long shot, this contrast is the engine that drives the relentless pulse of the plot.
To really understand Paris in this context, we have to look at this tragic timeline of French society, mapping out how things went so incredibly wrong. So throughout the 18th century, the aristocracy brutally exploited the poor. We're talking mass hunger and crushing taxation. Then, boom, we hit 1789, the uprising. The Bastille is stormed, the people finally revolt against their abusers. But look at where it leads by 1793, the Reign of Terror. You see, Dickens isn't just painting a simple black and white picture of good peasants versus evil aristocrats. He is showing us a terrifying equation. Unchecked oppression inevitably breeds hatred. And that hatred always explodes into destructive, uncontrollable violence.
A web of interconnected characters. The fates of the people living within this chaotic era are so deeply intertwined. Take Dr. Manette, a tragic figure trying to recover from 18 agonizing years locked in the Bastille. But right beside him is his daughter, Lucy. She's the emotional anchor of this entire story. Her boundless compassion actually helps restore her father's sanity. Then we have Charles Darnay, a French aristocrat who literally runs away from his privilege because he's so utterly disgusted by the cruelty of his uncle, the Marquis of Remold. And the Marquis? Well, he represents the absolute worst, most arrogant traits of the ruling class.
But the victims of men like the Marquis don't just sit quietly. So the crucial point is this vital distinction, the razor-thin line between justice and revenge. On one side, we have justice, the completely understandable, rightful desire of these starving, exploited peasants to throw off their abusers. But on the other side, we have revenge, perfectly personified by Madame Defarge. Her genuine suffering twists into this dark, obsessive hatred that just wants to destroy everyone connected to the aristocracy, whether they're actually guilty or not. The quest for justice completely sours, becoming its own sickening form of cruelty.
Symbols of the uprising.
Let's look at how Dickens masterfully uses symbolism, starting with the broken wine cask. Early in the book, a barrel of red wine shatters on the cobblestones of Paris. The starving people literally rush into the streets, frantically scooping up this muddy wine with their bare hands just to survive. It's a striking image that brutally illustrates the poverty of the working class, but it's also a chilling foreshadowing. That red wine staining the streets and the hands of the peasants is a direct, undeniable prediction of the massive bloodletting that's about to drown the city.
Next, we have Madame Defarge's knitting. Picture this, a woman sitting quietly at a wine shop, needles just clicking away. It looks like the most innocent, mundane thing in the world, right? But in reality, it's a terrifying hit list. She is methodically knitting a coded register of every single person she intends to send to the guillotine. It's chilling. She is quite literally weaving revenge directly into the very fabric of the revolution, stitch by deadly stitch.
And finally, the footsteps. Throughout the story, characters continually hear the echoing sound of hundreds of footsteps in the distance. It's this recurring auditory motif that constantly keeps us on edge, heightening the suspense. It represents approaching danger, the unavoidable march of the angry mob, and the grim reality that no matter how fast or how far you run, the past is always going to catch up with you. The echoes of those footsteps signal the inescapable arrival of the Reign of Terror.
Sidney Carton's ultimate redemption.
Sidney Carton is, without a doubt, the emotional center of this book, because his character arc is just incredible. He starts out utterly wasted. I mean, he's a brilliant English lawyer, but he's cynical, directionless, and completely self-loathing. But then he meets Lucy. His deep, unrequited love for her awakens something profound inside him. It gives him a spark of purpose. He realizes that even though he feels his own life is ruined, he can still do something deeply meaningful to protect the woman he loves, which leads to the ultimate sacrifice and his absolute redemption.
Because here is the breathtaking climax of the story. Charles Darnay, Lucy's husband, is sentenced to die at the guillotine simply for being an aristocrat. But Sidney Carton happens to look remarkably, almost identically like Darnay. So Carton smuggles himself into the deadly French prison, drugs Darnay, and actually switches clothes with him. He sends the unconscious Darnay away to safety with Lucy, and Carton stays behind in the cell, waiting for the executioner to call his name. It is the ultimate act of selflessness.
As he steps up to the guillotine, having secured the safety of the woman he loves, Sidney Carton finally finds the peace and meaning he spent his whole life searching for. He speaks what are perhaps the most famous final words in all of English literature. "It is a far, far better thing that I do than I have ever done." Through his physical death, he ensures that hope, love, and life survive.
The final verdict: the legacy of A Tale of Two Cities. Looking at the strengths and weaknesses, the pros heavily outweigh the cons. You have one of the most powerful character arcs ever written with Sidney Carton. On the flip side, the book does have a notoriously slow and complex beginning. Dickens drops a lot of dense historical context on you right away, and his Victorian sentence structure definitely takes some getting used to. Also, the revolutionary scenes are incredibly, disturbingly violent, though, to be fair, given the history, that's entirely by design.
Taking all that into account, this source material earns an enthusiastic 9 out of 10. If you're at all fascinated by complex moral questions, the intense psychology of a revolution, or character-driven tragedies that show the triumph of the human spirit in the darkest of times, this is an absolute must-read. The emotional payoff at the end is entirely worth the dense beginning.